So, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Chaz Summers, and I'm a educational specialist here at Foundations Inc. So, welcome to our Beyond the Conference webinar series. Today, we have Hillary Jones and Brittany Stanton from Foundations, and we'll be getting started shortly. But before we do, I just want to give you a little background about who we are and what we do here at Foundations. So, we are a national education nonprofit located in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. And our mission is to improve the quality of education by building the skills of educators. So we work across the school day with after school programs, schools, districts, and states to create a brighter future for every child every single day. So if you're interested in learning more about what Foundations does, you can follow us on our social medias, and we're dropping those in the chat for you right now. Now, you might already know us from our signature professional learning experience, Beyond School Hours. It's our really fun convention that we hold every year. We will be holding ours this year, well, in 2026, in Orlando, Florida, from March 1st to the 4th. And we'd love to have you be our guests there. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests for today. Although it's probably better if they do it themselves because they have a huge amount of experience and I can't do it justice. So, Hillary, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Hillary Jones. I'm the Director of Professional Learning at Foundations. And we are so glad that you all enjoy BSH every year. And we're glad you joined us for this webinar series today. I have been a program director, a classroom educator, and held a variety of roles in out of school time. And one of my favorite things to talk about is organizational leadership, structures, and systems. Brittany?
So I'm Brittany. I will echo all the things Chaz and Hillary already said. Thank you all for joining us and hope to see you at Beyond School Hours 2026. I am also an education specialist within the Office of Professional Learning here at Foundations. I started out though as a music educator and I taught music to K-12 students for about 7 years before moving into an out of school time program. Also happened to be a music program. And now I find myself here with these wonderful people and hoping to just, share some insight and input from my own experiences that you might find useful.
Awesome. So just so you know, before we get started, the webinar will be archived on our website and on YouTube, so you'll be able to access it later. So we're just going to get started and dive right into the questions because we have a lot of really fun and engaging questions and a lot of topics that we hear commonly from a lot of OST professionals. So we're going to start with some stuff around leadership. That's the plan. So what systems or strategies do you recommend for maintaining accurate compliance documentation without overwhelming your staff with all of the stuff, checking all of the boxes?
So I have a lot of things that I could say about this. But one of the things that I would recommend to you as you start to think about this is how can you put all of the information in one place? And then when it comes time for reporting to different organizations, agencies, people, etc., pull that information from the singular place and distribute it where it needs to go instead of having multiple mechanisms of collecting the same information. And so a lot of the time, one of the challenges that we face as program leaders is we get asked to complete this form for this reason and we give it to our staff. And then we get asked to complete this form for this reason and give it to our staff, et cetera, et cetera. And so I really recommend thinking about that in one kind of cohesive way. The other really effective tool to helping manage all that documentation specifically is having a calendar of what things need to be submitted when, how, where, etc. And making that something that everybody on your team knows, or at least all of those who are involved in submitting documentation in some way so they can see where their place and part in it goes.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. The recommendation around calendaring, when you need to collect data, when you need to collate data, all of those things can really help make sure that you remain compliant. The other thing that I was thinking is we've heard this from some programs, particularly those that are school-based programs that have various platforms or programs that they use for things like attendance and monitoring student progress and things such as that. If you have access to such a tool, utilize it. I've seen programs that have been school-based, they have a built-in attendance system that their after-school program can take the advantage of, and then they don't. And then they've had challenges around attendance, just like the collection of attendance data. So utilize the tools that are already available to you. But then also, you know, if you're a 21st century program, there's probably platforms you're required to use by your state, if not federally. Your school might have a specific program. If you're a community-based organization, you may or may not have a program to do the data collection through. So whatever it ends up being, if you can simplify and keep things in one spot, then it'll make your life a lot easier. The other thing to think about is some training of those who have to use those systems so that they have the ability and the knowledge to perform the tasks around data collection to make your leadership job more smoothly. Because as a leader, our job is not singularly collecting data. We are looking to our staff to take the attendance, to do the other things. And so making sure that those folks who are in those systems are trained to utilize them.
I think we have a great example of that in the chat. You know, we've got this example in Oklahoma where not only is there the uploading of data into the State Department website, but there's also the using of the data with the team to coordinate the information that's needed for it. And that's exactly what that work should look like.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of streamlining things. I love digital tools. I love calendaring. I love making sure that people know what they're responsible for, but they don't have to keep all the dates in their head, right? Because your frontline staff, none of them aspire to join your program and go, oh, I know, I'll make sure we're all organized, right? Like that's not why we're joining your program. That's not the aspiration, right? Speaking of those staff aspirations and like helping support those, how do you align your program's vision with individual staff goals and those aspirations, like their ideas about what they want to do in your program, to enhance that motivation and job satisfaction, hopefully retain that really good motivated staff?
So I think there's a couple of things to it. One is being really clear about what your vision is and making sure everybody knows it. That's a really easy piece to kind of get lost in the sauce sometimes of like day-to-day programming. And so we recommend that you engage in that way with it. I also would encourage people to think about what their staff and get to know what their staff do want to get out of the experience. And sometimes that's really hard because I have had the context where I ask staff, how do you want to develop personally this year within our organization? And I've had people tell me things like, well, I want to learn to knit. And that, especially with young staff that many of our out of school time programs are hiring and engaging with, they don't necessarily understand or have the context for what that professional learning opportunity looks like. And so sometimes it looks like providing a really broad array of options and opportunities for them so that they can start to understand that. But also it can look like really making the connection between the things that they do meaningfully want to do and then give them opportunities to grow and develop in that. And so for some of your more experienced staff that have more context for the work, for what professional development, professional learning looks like, finding opportunities for them to step into those leadership roles can be really meaningful. And bonus points, because it can also be really effective for sustainability of your program over time.
Imagine that, right? Investing in your program, investing in your staff helps sustain your program. So since we're talking about our experienced staff and giving them some tools so that they feel more effective in your program, can you describe some effective ways that you've empowered your staff to take leadership roles or just like greater responsibility in your program?
So whenever I was running programs, it was a small community-based organization, small and mighty team. And I'm sure everybody's heard the term wearing many hats. Everybody was wearing many hats at this point. And so one of the things that whenever I moved into more of an organizational leadership role, was to make sure that I told my staff what my availability was gonna be like my expectations and my availability and just what I wanted to be able to do for them. So things like, yes, I have an open door policy. You can come and ask me questions anytime. If they came in and they wanted to have a chat about something, I obviously, like, if it's a pertinent, like, I have to have this meeting right now, I'm gonna have that meeting, right? But if my staff comes to me and I'm doing something that I could do an hour later, I'm gonna have that conversation with them to work through whatever those problems are. And I think that's where it starts. And it kind of ties into what Hillary was just sharing about around professional development, like listening to your staff and understanding what they are telling you. That's active listening, right? To be able to listen very intentionally to what they're saying and take it to heart and do whatever you can to support them if that's a need, or maybe it's just a gripe, maybe they just need to vent, and that you're providing that safe space as a leader for that to happen. I know that's not like here's a single strategy to try, but it's really all about like the culture that you build as a leader with your staff.
I think too, just in some very practical ways, all of our staff should be given opportunities for growth and development. And that can look like all kinds of things. It can look like giving high school students the opportunity to plan and lead an activity when they're normally the assistants in the classroom. It can look like giving those emerging young adults who are, work with a group of students, but not necessarily instructors, an opportunity to try and take on that instructor role with really good support. And where that really good support comes from is there's more experienced instructors where you give the opportunity to them to do that modeling, that practice role, that supportive role, but also kind of step back in that and make sure that you're also giving those more experienced staff opportunities to step into those leadership roles, because they're the ones that when you retire, when you leave the work, when you transition to something else, they're taking it on. And if you haven't prepared and equipped them well for that role, one of two things will happen. One, they'll leave and your program needs them, or two, it'll crash and burn in ways that you're going to feel like, man, I invested so much time, energy, all the things that you do into your programs. And so it can look like a really wide variety of things, but giving them those opportunities and putting them in those places, even if you know that they're not quite ready for it, but putting really good supports around it is such a huge part of it. If our audience has things that they want to add, we love their ideas.
Yeah.
And if you all have questions, we have some that we've taken, but
I do want to remind you that please share your questions in the chat. We would love to answer them right here in real time. Hi, this is us right now doing our thing. I swear, we're right here and we're moderating the chat. You just tell us what your questions are and we will answer them right now to the best of our ability. But in the meantime, I do want to drill down on this develop staff piece because I think it's really important, and I think it's an investment in the length of the viability of your program in the long term, right? So, how do we leverage things like data and evaluation to support and motivate our team towards that continuous improvement, right? Like, how do we motivate them?
Yeah, motivation's a hard piece, especially when it comes to data. Not everybody's a data person,
Yeah,
right?
seriously.
I mean, so you get the glass, right? The glass over the eyes whenever you get the spreadsheet.
That blank look.
Yeah, it's all about connecting it to intention and purpose, right? So, aligning your staff's values and your program's values, understanding the mission and the vision of the organization. It's similar work around data, understanding why we need it, what the purpose of it is, and how it will be utilized, and also workshopping with the data actively as you go through the entire process, so that folks understand from the beginning to the end to the next beginning why you're doing all these things and why it's necessary. And particularly if we're talking about programs that are funded like 21st century programs, or maybe you're a licensed child care facility, data is extremely important. And we know that we have to be able to use the data to show the things that we have done with students and how they have grown and improved, but also just to tell the story of OST as a whole and why it matters. And so including your staff from the beginning all the way through the end of everything related to data so that they understand the why behind it. I mean, you're probably doing more of the analysis or the collection of, depending on the nature of your role. But why not sit down and look at it all together as a group to understand? You'll be better for it.
I think that's one of the things that, in programs that I get to visit, we often see missing is that the leadership collects the data, they use the data, they analyze the data, but the staff never get to see it at the front line, right? They don't know what it's saying. And it's a great way to be like, hey, y'all, this is what you're doing that's fabulous for these young people. And create spaces to shout them out and encourage that support that you're talking about, Chas.
So we've been talking a lot about developing our staff and making sure that we sort of have this like generational talent, right? Like we make sure that the next generation is ready and able to, become these new leaders. So when they become these new leaders, all of a sudden they have challenges that they didn't think about that we had, right? Things surrounding stuff like compliance and administrative tasks. So what advice would you give a new leader on prioritizing sort of multiple compliance issues, administrative tasks, without losing focus on what's important, the quality of the program?
So my answers are all like kind of simple, practical things that are actually very difficult to do in practice. Things like making sure that we create time in our personal working schedules for both the administrative work and for the things that improve quality of our programs. So it may mean doing things like delegating things. It may mean things like saying like, this is not my priority right now. I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to do it in a longer timeline than perhaps what someone else wants from us. But creating that space and making that time for both aspects of the work is an important part of it. Number two, anything that you can do to reduce the amount of times that you need to do compliance things or administrative things. It's very important work, but sometimes I find myself and we find ourselves doing the same thing multiple times, multiple ways.
No, that never happens.
All the time, all the time. And sometimes it's out of our control, but sometimes we can control it with our systems and our processes. And it is worth the investment as a leader to spend time fixing systems and processes that allow you to address those things. Got other ideas?
Maybe the less to the point, but something that I wish I understood better whenever I took on a larger leadership role was boundaries. Because whenever I took on that role, the plate got fuller, there were more hats, and there's lots of folks out there working in OST where that is your situation. You are the program director, and you are the facilitator of today's activity, and you are fill in the blank. You do have to do some boundary setting around this, right? You may feel that, okay, I couldn't get to these emails whenever I was at work today. I'm going to do it at 10 o'clock tonight when I get home.
Don't do it.
Yeah, set some boundaries for yourself. It's very, very important. Unless your building is on fire, nothing's actually on fire and can wait till the next day. You're going to need to set some boundaries around your work so that you can keep yourself well, so that you can keep doing the work.
So in kind of the same vein with supporting our staff and the people that we want to eventually be the leaders in our program, what techniques or practices do you regularly use to gauge staff satisfaction and proactively address potential issues, right? It's the ones that your staff might not be willing to tell you just in the moment, but they start as little molehills and they turn into mountains, and then we lost a good staff member.
This is a hard one,
Isn't it?
Because there's just so many variables. There's so many things that are going to change that situation, right?
Let's talk about the variables.
Let's categorize them, right?
All right, let's do it.
There are things within your control and there are things outside of your control.
Serenity prayer.
And if that individual is coming into your space with a lot of stuff in the outside of your control bucket, then there's not a whole lot that you can do other than maybe be a listening voice, a listener, to be a person that gives advice if that is what is asked for, right? Because we're still in a working relationship here. But then also knowing who to connect them to support them in whatever issues are happening in that side of things. But if the things are within your control, it's a matter of making sure that we're being communicative, that we're offering opportunities for staff to come to us to share whatever their concerns or their struggles or their thoughts and ideas are, and that they can feel safe in doing so. But then it's also, I think this comes back to just good leadership means that we're actively watching and we're observing all the time and using that to inform decisions and providing feedback all along the way. And whenever we are doing those kinds of things and actively giving feedback, then those little things that might crop up as issues and problems, you potentially may avoid some of those because you've created this opportunity for staff to have a conversation and you've established this culture of openness and that they can come and talk to you, or that culture of feedback that you're going to come in and you're going to be like, hey, that was really great today. There's this one thing, let's talk about it. Do you have a moment? Those things need to be very intentional and are going to make an impact on whether that staffer is going to come to you with the molehill, or whether it's going to be the mountain, or whether it's going to be I quit.
I think one thing I'll just add to that is to do that well, you have to be present for people. It is sometimes easy, or maybe it's just easy for me when I'm in I have my own work to do space, not to be present in the spaces where my staff are, where they're doing their work every day, where they're, around those things, and being able to see what's actually happening in program and be able to place myself in places where my staff can grab me and be like, hey, what do you think about this? Or I've got this thing going on, where it doesn't have to feel so formal that they need to schedule a meeting with you or come see you in your office or whatever those
Come down to the principal's office.
Exactly. And so creating your presence, making your presence known and available creates that space for staff.
I love that. Yeah. Having an open space, letting people know that you're there to listen and, you're there to be a supportive force for them. So we talked a lot about ways that we can support staff that we already have, and make sure they stay and grow and become valuable parts of our program. Let's talk about new staff for a second. How do you structure onboarding to help new staff feel connected, confident, and engaged from the start, or at least as quickly as possible?
This is also a hard one in OST because I know there's so many programs that are hurting for staff.
Yeah.
And so your number one priority is to get a body in that building to watch the children so that you are in compliance for your ratios, right? But you really need to take the opportunity to onboard that staff member and do so with lots of intention. So taking a look at what is your current onboarding process? Where are the gaps? Where are the good things? I know that I've held several different positions in several different kinds of education fields, right? And I've never had a singular onboarding experience. I've gone from no onboarding experience to a good onboarding experience and everywhere in between. And obviously there's some of that comes down to the nature of that organization and what do you need for that position? But that's why I say, look at what your current onboarding practices are and do a little evaluation. Find out where are things missing. Are you really equipping them in this new role as a new staffer who may have never worked in education or with children, period, right? That you're equipping them with some things that they can feel successful right from the get-go. And one of the other things that's really important for them to learn in this onboarding process is what's the mission and vision of the organization? What is the whole purpose of the program? What are the goals for the students? Setting all those things up in the beginning, because it's going to feel irrelevant to that person later on.
Yeah.
And that's not going to help anything.
It's spring. And so a lot of people are starting to think about summer and summer camp and summer out of school time programs, all the different things. And for many programs, that means bringing on a lot of staff really quickly. It means, hey, we've got 60, 80, 100, 200 new staff
Yeah.
for this season. And so a few things that I've learned along the way, some because of my own mistakes, include things like, number one, you need more time than you think that you need.
Yeah.
One day of orientation for your summer camp job is not sufficient. So make that time, make that space. And that time and space needs to have a couple of things in it. It needs the really practical stuff of what we do when the fire alarm goes off and how we sign the kids in and out and all of those pieces. But it also needs opportunities for your staff to understand your organizational culture. And you don't have to use that time and just do team building for staff to understand that. Sometimes we think, well, I need to spend 4 hours doing team building for my staff to understand our organizational culture. And I would argue that you can actually use that time much more intentionally to do two things at the same time. So I'll give an example of this that I've used in my own program spaces. I really valued in my organization how we handled discipline issues and behaviors, and it really became core to how we engaged with young people in our program spaces. And there was a very clear process and procedure around that. Well, we trained our staff on that process and procedure, but one of the ways that we did that training included giving groups a role play scenario that they then needed to decide how the adults were going to respond to the situation that they were supposed to role play, and then perform it for the group.
Right, yeah.
But it gave us opportunity to talk very clearly about our values, and it was the most hysterical thing every year. And staff who returned year after year looked forward to it because they would be the kids who make the runs in your program.
You get to feed the kids.
And so that's a really great way to engage in that process. One of the other things I will say is those pieces too that are we do this every year around what we do when the fire alarm goes off and how we serve lunch. If you've got returning staff, make them the new trainers of that segment. That also gives a sense of the culture, the community, the team to new staff members. And so, in some ways, let some of it go, but in some ways, create the space very intentionally for that, because it takes longer than you think it does for people to actually be prepared for the first day of the program. That's unique to, here's a whole group of people starting at one time.
Sure.
And that will have to look different when you do it. Hey, we just hired this new person, but some of it looks the same, right? Have them and give them opportunities to shadow somebody who's experienced, right? Put them in the classroom with somebody who's been doing it a long time, not just you. So they begin to see and hear other voices around those places and spaces.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a couple terms, and it just reminded me that not everybody understands what trauma-informed care is, what we mean when we say it. And I just use that as an example term. There's so many, and even like acronyms, like, do you understand what all of the jargon and lingo that we're going to be using in our programs is? And it seems like it's such a small thing, but you know, there's going to be people out there that don't want to ask for clarification. They're going to be too shy or be like, oh, they might feel like, oh, I'm not educated enough, so I'm like worried about asking. But just give them the tools that they need from the get-go based on what your program is. Because what your program is, the students that you serve, all of those things are going to drive what is a meaningful onboarding process or training, or, you know, we talked about professional development earlier. That's also going to be contingent on, like, what are the needs of your program? What does your staff need because of the needs of your program?
I really like those things. I like the two answers that we've just given sort of combined, right? Because we're talking about meaningful and intentional onboarding and making sure that your program feels like it's a space where your staff can then like voice any questions that they might have. So they're not just staring at what feels like alphabet soup for them. And all of a sudden they're like, at this point, I'm just too afraid to ask what that means. So I'm just going to fake it till I make it, right? We don't want that. We want, if you have the question, we want you to ask the question so that we can train you up and give you that information. speaking of training up staff and, making sure that they feel equipped, sometimes programs just don't have a budget for making sure that they can have some real good intentional PD. So can you give us some examples of some effective low cost or even no cost, because I love free 99, developmental strategies that can be, implemented with your staff?
Come to these webinars. They're
See what I did there?
But one of the things is that, yeah, you might, as a program leader, get to come to one of these webinars and your staff are still teaching school
Yeah.
or not available, running their part of programming. And so, one of the most valuable things that anybody who gets to participate in any kind of professional development, free or not free, can do for their programs is then translate that or offer that to the rest of the team. And so maybe you can't send your whole team to a conference, but you can send one person. Well, that person went to 6 sessions while they were there. What can they come back and train your staff for the next 6 weeks in staff meeting about what they learned in each of those 6 sessions? And so use those as learning opportunities. Capitalize on the strengths of your staff. So, I had a pretty busy performing arts program as part of that. And we had a lot of people who had a lot of different skills in the arts. And several of them would come and teach and share about their content knowledge expertise in our staff meetings in order to help the staff better engage in what was happening when they were in the classrooms with those young people. And so using your staff as training resources can be a huge part of that. But there's lots of options out there. And I think the most meaningful thing of any training opportunity is actually the reflection that happens with it. And so creating space for your staff to be like, what did we learn and how does this apply in our context can be done with very little input.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Well, I mean, I think that it's just so important, like you said, to recognize what needs are within your staff, but what skills and strengths are also within your staff, because that can be a connector to so many other opportunities. They might be able to say, well, actually, I know somebody who might be able to, but I also think that there's a lot out there. And free is never really advertised well. So you do have to go on a little bit of a hunt, but thinking about what exists within your community, what resources are you already connected with that might have some free training opportunities. So for example, if you have a local Office of Child Care Licensing, they might have some training available on their website or be able to refer you to who they suggest for that. And it may or may not be free. You just have to do some looking, right? Check out your local libraries. Are you a school-based organization? Is there a training program that exists within that maybe you can tap into? Thinking about those connections that you already have and who's within your community that you can connect with to be able to provide some of those opportunities. But I also think that it's really important to not make assumptions about staff, and like you might have a vision and you want to send this on this learning journey. But if you're not establishing the why and doing some reflection on the back end to say, how can we use this in our practice, then it might fall flat on staff, and then that's just wasted time, energy, and effort, and probably funds, which we don't want to do any of that. So just making sure that we've talked a lot about having good conversations with staff and everything. Do like a little needs assessment with your staff to understand what the true needs that they have are, what they view them to be, in addition to what you view them to be, and try to meet in the middle around that. So yes, tapping into those other things within your community, even on a national level, there's a lot of stuff that, I know like there's things changing in the ether, but there's still a lot of resources out there for free that you can find if you just do a little digging.
That's a Very comprehensive answer. There is a part of it that I want to drill down on just a little bit more. We touched on sort of mentoring and like having sort of like a peer leadership, peer tutoring kind of thing with your staff, like your older, more experienced staff with the younger newbies. Can we talk a little bit about fostering a like environment where that can happen and where that learning, that mutual learning can happen?
Well, not everybody is set out to be a mentor.
That's
So,
true. You might have the knowledge,
If
but
you don't set it up, they will find their own mentors within your organizational space.
Mhm.
So you'd rather
Yeah.
yes.
inform that than let them inform that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So really thinking about the pairing, right? Not just from skills, but also things like personality and experiences. You might have a new person who is a recently retired teacher, but they've never worked in the out of school time space. They're going to be contributing lots of wonderful things to your program, but maybe don't necessarily know best practices of OST, right?
Mhm.
And that looks a little bit different. So pairing them with that staff member who you've had for 3, 4, 5, 20 years, whatever it is, is still going to be valuable, but making sure that you set it up right at the beginning so that they understand what the relationship is going to, both of them are on the same page or both agreeing, those are very important because you can't bully a donkey.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. On the other side of bullying, right? Let's talk about motivating, right? Let's talk about some ways to recognize those wins that the staff have as they're growing and developing in your program. But a lot of programs don't have the budget to do anything that costs money, to do those kinds of to do that kind of recognition. So what kind of advice would you give about, low or no cost ways to recognize those wins for your staff?
Well, try not to just make it come out of your budget.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Just because your program can't afford it doesn't mean that you have to make that happen, right? So this again, I think comes down to looking at what's around you, what's available,
Mhm.
where are the skills, where are the talents, who can I tap into? A staff potluck costs $0, but is that really the thing that's gonna,
Right.
show staff that we appreciate them? The thing that so I have a box. I have a little cardboard shoebox that I have had since my student teaching days over a decade ago, and every note, every card, every thing that I got from a student, I put inside this box.
Ooh.
Same with like if I got like a note from my administrator of gratitude or anything remotely close to that, it goes inside that box. I think those kinds of things mean more to staff than a potluck or a pizza party
Yeah.
or whatever,
Absolutely.
Are there opportunities and ways for students to show their appreciation as well, right? That you write your staff member a little note to say, that was, I appreciate you so much, you're amazing, wonderful. But when you hear it from a kid, it's
different.
it hits
And
different.
you want to know what's even better? When you hear it from a parent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My kid told me that you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and that comes down to culture again, right?
Mhm.
Are we embedding this into our culture, this idea of, gratitude for one another and appreciation? The other thing that, and we had like a whole webinar, I guess it was in January, on some like new ideas and things that you can do with staff. And there were so many wonderful suggestions that we got from participants in the chat, like right now, which by the way, if you're not scrolling through the chat, Tammy has blown it up and given us a bunch of great ideas and insight.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
You should be taking them. So thank you, Tammy, for chiming in. But are there opportunities where staff can shout out one another? Like, is there, I was just in Wisconsin doing a training and they were talking about, they do a wow wall.
Oh,
And
I like that.
so when there's moments that make you go, wow, you take a Post-it note and you write it down, you put it on the wow wall. So, I mean, there's lots of things that you can be doing, but it's what's going to be meaningful for your staff.
I think another thing to think about that is a unique fit in the out of school time space is giving staff who you want to recognize opportunities to do things that they might not otherwise get. And here are like the things I mean around that. Somebody's got to drive the bus for the dance team. And the dance, it's not supposed to be the dance instructor. There needs to be somebody else with them. send that staff who's doing a phenomenal job, even though normally you'd go and you'd like be in charge and be the, organization representative. Let that person go and have that opportunity to do something really cool with your young people. Or let that staff member who normally, wouldn't go speak at this community event about your organization, because you'd go, because it's your job.
Right.
Let them go. Right? Prepare them, work with them. But those kind of opportunities help people feel valued in ways that they may not get otherwise. And so when you do that, you demonstrate like, hey, I recognize your skills, I recognize your knowledge, I recognize your investment and your passion. And like those feel like small rewards because they're kind of adventures for people.
Yeah, like a little win. Like, you know what? Why don't you go take a victory lap right now with your kids? Because you can see.
Also ties into all the other things we've talked about around like professional development, and it's like one of the things that keeps people in jobs is opportunity for growth and advancement. So it's both.
It's both of the things. All right. So to put a bow on our staff questions and supporting staff questions, we get variations of this question a lot when we're giving trainings, right? So people always want to know, am I providing enough support and tools to the people I manage to be successful? And if so, how can I tell that I am providing enough tools, right? What is enough? When am I overloading them? When do they have enough to do their job?
So, number one, I would ask, are they being successful? And if your answer is, I don't know, then you kind of have to roll back to, okay, what are our measures of success?
Yes.
What are we looking at as success within our organization? Because then if they're being successful, yes, you are providing it unless, here's my unless, you ask them the question and they're like, because you've created good culture, and are like, hey, listen, do you have what you need? What do you need from me? What are those resources that I should be giving you that you don't have? There are some people who, if you don't ask, are just gonna be like, I'll figure it out now.
Yeah.
And there are people who, if you don't ask, will come back to you and say like, hey, what do I do about this thing?
Mhm.
And so just creating that space for them to tell you what they need. Otherwise, if they're being successful, yeah, great job, you're doing it. So I don't know, what else did you add?
I mean, I just think it circles back to our talks around opportunities for growth. I mean, it really, right?
Yeah.
If it's successful, we can still grow.
Yeah.
Mhm.
If it's not successful, we need to grow.
Yeah.
And working to identify, the reasons behind that. So
Mhm.
is it out of our control or in our control? Taking a step back to the beginning and seeing if you can't follow the storyline to where you are right now and how it came to be the way that it is. And then you can make a plan to, adjust if you need to. But it's really, it's the opportunity for these things to take place. That's it, opportunity and intentionality. If there's two words I've said too much today, it's those.
Can you ever say them too much? I don't think you can. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of what we've been talking about is just making sure that there's space for them to grow, and then there's there's a scaffold that allows them to grow, right? Letting our raspberry plants or whatever, since it's spring, grow and then bloom. So let's take a moment and pivot to families, because we've been talking a lot about staff, but that's only one of the multiple components of our program here, right? So let's talk about some strategies for maintaining family engagement and communication as students start to transition from either elementary to middle or middle to high school, right? Like, how can we make sure that we're still keeping those families engaged with our program and making sure they come back in our program instead of, deciding, oh, well, my kid's in high school now, he's going to go do A, B, or C instead of go to after school.
Chaz, I almost think that those are two separate things, right? One of it is engaging the families and one of it is engaging the youth.
Yep.
So since you said we're going to talk about families, I'm going to talk about the family part of it.
Okay.
But acknowledging that keeping youth engaged, if they want to be in your program and in your program spaces, they will do part of that work.
I think that's really
And
important.
it's a different challenge.
I just want to say, it's important to think about, the agency that youth have as they get older, right? And then if they feel like that agency isn't being respected, then yeah, I'm sorry.
They're out the door.
Yeah.
No, I'm totally with you. So when it comes to families, the key is maintaining it.
Mhm.
Well, maybe the key is starting it, but you asked about maintaining it.
Yeah.
And we have to maintain it. And even as our youth build more independence, and they may not need you to like say, so and so finished their 10 minutes of reading today, and they have a spelling test on Friday that we studied for, right to parents at checkout. They still likely need somebody to be like, hey, they're rocking it and their homework done. Or they did this really phenomenal STEM activity today that they get engaged in. And so continuing through that process is a huge part of it with them, and just staying connected with families, continuing to build the relationships about what's going on in the family dynamics that your middle school students or high school students may not talk to you about. But using those positive moments to talk about it, what's going on, can be a really positive way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I think that this is a hard question to tackle because there's a lot of programs out there that they end grade wise with the schools.
Yeah,
And so there is no after school connection between elementary and middle and so on and so forth. But there might be. It depends on your program. The program I worked in served students in second grade through 12th grade. So it might be that that's a possibility for you. But if it's not, I think it's a matter of being a connector. So when it comes to family engagement, what happens at the first moments are the most important because it's going to establish everything, right? And then it's a matter of maintenance. But you can be that connector. Okay, we've loved, my child is moving from 5th grade to 6th grade. We loved your program. We really are looking for something. You don't serve 6th graders. What do I do now, you know? And to be able to say, well, actually, there's this great program at your school, or the school that they're going to has all of these options. Here's some community centers in that area, you know, to be that connector to other after school programs or summer programs or, you know, what have you. That could be really just, it's a nice way to say to families that you care, right? That you can make that referral to another program. It's following that through line. They've started with you whenever they were, you know, 5 years old, and now you've seen them grow, and we're just going to miss you so much, but we want to see you be successful. Here's some recommendations. And that could be really powerful.
yeah. I like the idea of making sure that families feel heard, and once they're like, because they are heard, you can support the individual needs that they have, whatever concerns that there are, right? When we talk about getting that family feedback, normally we do it through surveys and stuff, but sometimes it's really difficult to intentionally take that feedback and then use it to improve our program. So how can we better utilize family feedback or surveys to get that continuous improvement without overwhelming our staff and overwhelming parents and guardians with constantly asking for feedback, right?
Some things that just come to my mind is when you've built those intentional relationships with families and they understand you well and you understand them well, that it creates natural places for that feedback instead of like forced and structured places for that feedback. When you and your staff have built those relationships from the very beginning, we have an example in the chat of just like creating spaces for program aides to make those initial connections.
Yeah.
And when they're fostered over time, they then in turn allow for, you know, that regular ongoing communication and feedback that our programs feel and families feel positive about. And it doesn't feel like another chore. It doesn't feel like another form to fill out. It doesn't feel like another thing that you need to do. It doesn't feel like another issue or conflict between parents and programs. It's just part of like, hey, can you do this? Hey, we're thinking about this. How do you respond to that? Those things can happen. But it also requires some more of that being of present
Yeah.
that we talked about
Mhm.
earlier, right? It's, standing at the door at pickup and talking to families while kids put on coats and backpacks and all those kinds of things.
Those conversations that feel casual, but there's intention behind them.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think it's also taking a look at what are you currently doing as far as that family, if it's a survey, what is that thing that you're trying to collect feedback through? And is it the right fit for the families within your program? Maybe there is some technology barriers and they can't necessarily access your online survey. Maybe it's a matter of just having everybody together in one place at one time to do the thing. Looking at what is that unique quality of the families within your program, and are you strategizing your collection of feedback to meet them where they're at? And I think about things like, we're seeing a lot of town halls right now. Are you doing something similar with your families if you can't get them to answer a survey? Did you consider something like that? I've also seen programs that have put together, advisory committees, parent advisory, or like a teacher parent collab association, whatever you want to call it. Is there an opportunity for families to engage in that way? Because you will get a lot of feedback through that. And even if it's a small team of parents that are on that committee or whatever you want to call it, they could be your connectors to all the other families and help you tell the story of why it's important that you get this feedback. We all know that it's a funding game. And so whenever we are able to tell our stories and to use the data to back up our stories, then we know that we have a greater chance of the programs continuing. And when families understand that they engage in a different way because they don't want to see your program go away.
I love that. I love the engagement and the feedback, making your families feel invested in the long-term survivability of your program. So on that note, we worry about sustainability a lot, and we hear a lot of questions about it when it comes to programs, but we don't often think about the ways that families can help impact our sustainability, right? So what effective strategies can programs implement to encourage families to advocate for and support sustainability beyond the grant period?
I think that I'll use an example. There is a initiative. I know that there's several states that do this, but I formerly worked in the state of Delaware, and there was this one day that's dedicated to fundraising in Delaware called Do More 24. Actually kind of happened recently. And there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that participate, but a lot of after school and out of school time programs are also nonprofits. And so there were pages for some of these programs. That initiative, the organization that puts that all together has a communication packet that they provide to nonprofits to utilize during that time. And I'm just using this as the example because we don't necessarily have the bandwidth in our programs to be coming up with these communication marketing packets. And there's probably not a lot of budget around those items either for your program. But the idea of how can I develop some kind of tool that around communication and marketing that is relevant to families that they can use. So coming up with some images that are, more generic, if you will, that have some brief program information that they can post to their social media pages. That seems like, okay, well, is it going to make that big of an impact? It may not be anything but the first ripple, but that's all you need.
Yeah.
Right? You just need the first ripple for the rest of them to follow. And so thinking about if you don't have a parent committee of some kind, they could help you brainstorm around creating such a tool that you can then give families. You have a newly enrolled family, ask them who they know, right? They can also connect you to so many other things, whether that's their neighbor kid that's going to enroll next week, or whether that's, oh, actually, I've got a rich uncle. It could be anything.
I was thinking definitely along those lines. Sometimes we view families as receivers of our resources, but really, we need to view families as stakeholders in what's best for their young people, for their kids. And so remembering that families may have a lot to offer. They may have connections to offer, contacts to offer. They live in these communities
That's
where
true,
our
yeah.
programs are. They may know, oh, I know the owner of the local pharmacy who would donate to XYZ project that you're working on. I know, right? Whoever it is that may engage with that project. That's number one. Number two is sometimes families are willing to engage in our program because of the value that they have for them in ways that we don't think about. Have you thought about asking families to volunteer in your program in some way, right? And get human capacity from them as much as, or in the same ways that they benefit from the human capacity that your program offers. Just being creative in those ways of how families can bring something to the table, as well as how families can receive from your program, can be really meaningful. And so I'd encourage you to be creative around that and talk to families about what they have to offer. What resources can they share? What can they do? You know, Brittany was talking about a marketing resource, but I've had families who said, oh, well, I volunteer to do translation of documents for your organization. They can't do it real time during our program hours. They're not going to show up and volunteer to teach an art class. But hey, you can make sure that my newsletter goes home in Vietnamese because we don't have anybody on our staff who has that skill set for us, right? Things like that are real ways families can invest in your program. And when you do that, they feel that the program offers more value to them.
Yeah, absolutely, right? It builds the connection between you and your families. And it also gives you an opportunity to build trust. Which is something that, of course, is integral to like running any program and having interactions with staff, right? But sometimes we run into issues like barriers with building that trust when it comes to our historically marginalized or underserved communities. So do you have any tips? And we're coming to the end of our session now, but if you have any questions, please add them in the chat. And if we don't get to them now, we will get to them at some other time, I promise. But I do want to talk about supporting and building that trust with marginalized and underserved communities.
We've talked a lot about listening today.
We
and I think
have.
that's where it starts. But I also realize that there's some fatigue within these communities around telling the same stories and sharing the same issues that have just been. But regardless, that's where it has to start. If we're ever going to understand each other and work towards the same goal, we have to understand where we're coming from. And especially if you are an individual who does not identify with the students and the families that you're serving, then you need to do some work around getting to that place. And I will never understand the Black experience, but I can have conversations with folks in that community to understand those experiences and the impacts that it has then on the work that I do. So yeah, conversations and listening.
I absolutely agree. And those are some really important starting places. I will add to that list. Number one, making sure that your families know that your program is a safe place for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that looks like a lot of different things for a lot of different families based on the context of where your program is, who your program's serving, all those different things. But finding ways to make sure that families understand that your program is going to be that safe space. I have stood and had to say to families like, I can commit to you that this is what makes our program safe for you and your child. When parents are afraid that like, are my child's citizen issues going to make this unsafe for me? Are my child's special needs going to make this program unsafe for me? Are my child's any kind of different thing going to make this place unsafe for me? And then the second thing that I'll add to the list that Brittany started is this. When you have that parent or parents that you've connected with, empower and equip them to connect with other families that come from similar backgrounds or student experiences. And so make them those partner parents in the work. And so I picked on the language example earlier. I'll pick on it a little bit again. And we've got a great comment in the chat about the resources that those other language speaking parents may have. But, I had parents who were like, oh, you want to talk to the parents about this? I'll make sure that I talk to all of my families of the same language, of the same faith tradition, of the same group of kids who have special needs. Like, I got that. I got that, Miss Hillary. I got them. I'll let you know. Great. But I had to empower and equip those parents to play that role and make them take on a little bit the ownership and responsibility, but the opportunity to do that and engage them in that way.
Yeah. I think it all just stems from making sure that all these families feel safe, in your program, and then you can build that trust from there. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I'd love to talk more about it, but I know that we are at the end of our time today. So I would like to take a moment to thank Hillary and Brittany for being here, and to all of you for coming. So please take a moment and fill out the survey that we're dropping in the chat. Because if you fill out that survey and you've attended, which you have, thank you very much, then you get your certificate of attendance. And of course, we value your feedback, and we use it to inform the programming that we deliver on a regular basis. So that's very valuable to us. I would encourage you to join us for the next Better Basics that we are putting on April 22nd for career and technical education. Another topic that I'm very passionate about, and I'll probably talk way too much about it, but I look forward to it, and I look forward to sharing so much more information with all of you. So we hope you'll join us for that session, and we hope that you have a wonderful day.
Thank you all for joining us.